The sky above the station was dark with smoke as the last transport ship stood ready to leave. The cold wind howled through the steel gates, while guards in silver armor pushed the final group of humans toward the loading ramp. No one spoke, only the sound of boots and metal filled the air. Cale stood at the front of the line, his eyes sharp as face. Still he was tall, strong, and quiet. Once a general, now just another exile. His hands were bound, but his mind was free. He looked up at the alien ship, its black surface smooth and shining like a blade, waiting to cut through the stars. Behind him, children held their mothers, old men leaned on walking sticks, and soldiers with broken armor helped the weak. Some cried, others stared at the ground, some whispered prayers to gods that never answered, but none dared to hope. The voice of the alien commander echoed from the loudspeakers, his words slow and full of pride. "You are being sent to PX-79, he said, the suicide planet. He called it. No food, no water, no life, no return." The guards laughed cold, and without feeling, one leaned close to Cale and whispered, "No one lasts more than 10 days there. Enjoy your final walk." Cale said nothing. He only looked forward as the gates opened and the humans marched up the ramp. The ship roared to life, engines burning bright as it rose into the sky, carrying the last of Earth's people to a place no one was meant to survive. Inside the ship it was cold, and dark metal walls hummed with energy as the humans sat close together, sharing warmth, sharing fear. Cale sat in the center, his back straight, his eyes closed. He remembered battlefields, he remembered fire, he remembered his oath never to surrender, never to break. The trip was silent. No food was given, no water, just the sound of the engines and the slow passing of time. Then, at last, the voice returned. "Prepare for landing," it said. PX-79 came into view through the small windows, a planet of storms, black oceans, and yellow skies. Lightning danced across the clouds, while winds tore across the surface. The ground was red, and cracked mountains stood like broken teeth. Nothing green, nothing soft, nothing kind. The ship landed hard, shaking as the doors opened. The guards pushed the humans out one by one onto the hard, dry soil. The heat hit them like fire. The air burned in their lungs. The wind carried dust sharp as knives. Then, without a word, the ship rose and flew away, disappearing into the sky, leaving the humans behind. Cale looked around, men and women coughing, children covering their faces with cloth, soldiers squinting into the storm. Already the strong were helping the weak, already the human spirit was showing. He knelt and scooped up a handful of dirt. He let it run through his fingers, coarse, dry, bitter. Then he stood and spoke, his voice strong and clear. "We survive or we die. Today we choose." The others gathered around, forming a circle, eyes on him. No longer just a soldier, he was now a leader again, not by force, but by need. "We build shelter, we find water, we protect each other." He said, "They want us to give up, to fade, to rot. They sent us here to end us, but they made a mistake. They forgot who we are." Dr. Lena stepped forward, holding a scanner, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. "I found minerals in the ground, metals we can use, maybe even signs of water deep below." Cale nodded. "Then we begin now. No waiting, no crying, no dying. Today we work." And so the humans moved like ants across the dead land. They used scraps from the landing site, old gear, and broken tools. They cut into the rock, dug into the dirt, built walls from stone and metal, set up shields from the wind. They shared everything, food, water, strength, and pain. One man fell from heat stroke, another lifted him, another took his place. No one was left behind, no one gave up. At night they gathered under a broken roof and listened as the wind screamed around them. But inside there was calm, there was light, there was the sound of a baby laughing, and that was enough. Above them, high in orbit, a small Union drone watched. It sent images back to command, expecting to see corpses. Instead it showed heat signatures, movement like construction. The alien officer frowned as he looked at the screen, his voice full of disbelief. "They should be dead," he said. "This is not possible." But it was happening. Cale stood on a rock, watching his people work, watching the fires grow, watching life return to a place meant for death. He did not smile, but his eyes held fire, the same fire that had burned in the hearts of warriors across history, the same fire that said, "We are not done, we are not broken, we are not afraid." And so the humans stayed, the humans worked, the humans lived, not just to survive, but to show the stars that humanity was still here and had no plans to fade quietly. PX-79 was not a place made for life. It was a world built to end stories, not begin them. The sky above the human camp stayed the color of old bruises, purple, gray, black, always shifting, always watching. The wind screamed across the cracked land like a beast in pain, and the ground boiled with heat during the day and froze like iron at night. But the humans did not break. They worked, they learned, they changed. Cale stood on a high rock overlooking the camp, his arms crossed against the sharp wind. He watched as the first shelters came together, made from ship scrap stone, and Hope children carried small tools, while older ones hauled metal and wire. The camp was alive, buzzing with hands and sweat and the quiet, stubborn will of people who refused to die. Dr. Lena walked up the slope beside him, her boots dragging through the dust, her face covered with a scarf, her eyes red from the wind, but burning with light. She held out a scanner, made from parts no one remembered anymore. "The soil is poison," she said. "Everything up here is poison. But 200 meters down there is something strange, a different layer, cool, damp, full of root structures, not native to this world." Cale looked at the scanner, then at the sky, then back at the camp. "We go down," he said. Teams formed at once, engineers, builders, diggers, even children came with tools and eager hands. The digging was hard, the ground fought back, rocks cracked, tools snapped, skin tore, but the people kept going, hour after hour, day after day, into the red earth. They carved a new life. Then on the fourth day someone shouted a sound like hope, and the digging stopped as the first clear drop of water rolled down a rock wall, cold, fresh, clean. Cheers broke the silence, arms raised, voices cried together, laughter filled the air louder than the wind, and for a moment PX-79 was not a curse but a place of promise. Cale knelt and drank the water, then stood and looked at his people. "We live today because we refused to die yesterday," he said. "We build tomorrow because we fight today. This is just the beginning." And it was. From the ground they pulled not only water, but roots thick and pale and strange. They looked like twisted ropes, soft as meat but tough as bone. Dr. Lena studied them in her lab, made from half a ship and a fallen tower. She boiled the roots, tested their skin, crushed their juice under a crude microscope made from glass and scrap. "They are toxic," she said, "to most creatures, but not to us. We can clean them, cook them, use them." Cale nodded. "Then we farm this planet even if it tries to kill us." Above them lightning danced across the sky, not just once or twice, but always, like the sky itself was alive, and angry storms rolled in without warning. Acid rain burned holes through steel, but the camp had grown smarter, faster, stronger. They built shields made from sand and wire and old solar cells. They dug tunnels to hide from fire. They made gloves from alien scales and boots from the hides of things they hunted in the night. PX-79 did not give life, but humans knew how to take what they needed. They hunted strange beasts that crawled in the dust, big things with too many eyes, too many legs, and skin like armor. The first hunt was bloody. 3 died, but their deaths were not in vain. The meat was foul but rich, and the bones made tools. The skin made tents, the eyes made glass. Cale kept a record of every death, every wound, every mistake. He carved names into metal and placed them around the camp like stars, so they would never be forgotten. And the people saw this and knew they mattered, that no one would fade into the dirt. One night, as the fires burned low and the wind howled around the camp, a strange hum filled the air like a song with no voice, a sound that moved through bones, not ears. It came from the west, where the mountains stood like broken teeth. Cale sent scouts, 3 men and 1 woman. They left with packs and blades and fire in their hearts. They came back with silence and fear. They found a structure, they said, not made by humans, not made by nature. It hummed with power. It moved when no one touched it. It opened when no one knocked. Dr. Lena went to see it herself with Cale by her side. The structure was buried in the side of a hill, black and smooth-shaped, like a spear broken in half. It pulsed with light that had no color. Inside they found markings, not letters, not numbers, but shapes that made the mind ache. Tools made from crystal machines that ran with no fuel. A room filled with pods, 1 pod still glowing. It held a small creature like a child, with skin like gold and eyes like light. It breathed slow but deep, and when Dr. Lena touched the glass, its eyes opened, and it spoke not with sound but with thought. "I am soul," and it said, "I was left behind." Cale stared at the creature, then looked at Lena. "What is this?" Lena shook her head. "This is not Union tech. This is older, maybe much older." Solon blinked once, then again, and spoke again. "They sent us here long before you. They used PX-79 as a cage, as a grave. My people built this place to survive, but we failed. They found us and wiped us clean. I was hidden. I was waiting." Cale felt his fists tighten. "The Union lied this planet was not empty, it was full of ghosts, full of secrets, full of crimes. Solon said more things that twisted in the air like smoke. He spoke of cities underground, swallowed by storms of machines, lost in the dark of creatures that once ruled the stars, but now only howled in the night. Dr. Lena recorded every word, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. We are not the first, Kale said, but maybe we are the last, and maybe that is enough. They brought Solon back to the camp wrapped in cloth and silence. The people stared, some afraid, some curious, some ready to protect. That night the storm was stronger than ever, but the camp held firm. The shields burned, the towers shook, but the fire inside the humans never flickered. Kale stood at the gate, watching the storm, watching the stars beyond the clouds, watching his people work, eat, sleep, fight, dream. They called this the suicide planet, he said to himself. They thought we would fade. They thought we would vanish. But PX-79 made a mistake. It gave humans something to fight, and that meant it gave them something to win. The night sky above PX-79 was thick with dark clouds, but behind them, far beyond the storms, the stars waited, watching like old gods. Cold and distant, the camp below had changed from a cluster of broken tents to a stronghold of steel and stone and fire. Humans moved with purpose, building, shaping, surviving, and more than that, they were planning. Kale stood inside the tower, a tall, thin building made from ship metal and old frames, now covered in wire and cloth. His eyes were fixed on the map, laid across the table, lines marked tunnels, paths, water routes, danger zones, and now a new point glowing red on the west ridge. Dr. Lena sat beside him, her fingers dancing across the controls of a handmade panel. The buttons mismatched, the wires messy, but it worked. It was her creation, a transmitter built from alien scraps, ship pieces, solar coils, and hope. We found the signal, Kale said low and careful. The others need to hear it. The galaxy needs to know. Lena nodded, her hands still moving. I boosted the signal range last night. We can reach a relay station. If it is still active, it might be weak, but it is something. Outside the wind howled, but inside the camp voices rose in small groups, laughter from the children, songs from the old soldiers, even the strange low hum of Solon's voice as he taught the younger ones to read his ancient symbols. Solon had become part of them, not human, not alien, something between. He moved like water, he spoke like wind, his thoughts strange and heavy, but his heart full of fire. He stood now near the tower, his eyes glowing in the dark, his hands raised as he felt the vibrations in the soil. Something is coming, he whispered to no one, something big, something loud. Kale looked up from map and stared at the small glowing transmitter on the table. It blinked, once, then twice, then faster. We are ready, Lena said, her voice shaking, but her grip firm. Are you sure we should send it? Kale did not answer for a moment. Then he spoke. Send everything, the camps, the bodies, the roots, the water, the tech, the lies. Send it all. Lena pressed the final switch. The lights dimmed, the tower shook, a pulse of energy climbed into the sky, riding the storm higher and higher until it passed through the clouds and into space, where silence ruled. The signal carried images of humans working, of Solon waking, of machines moving, of beasts hunted and shelters raised. It carried voices, shouting, crying, laughing. It carried proof that PX-79 had failed as a grave. Far above the planet in the cold orbit, a small Union relay caught the signal and blinked awake. After months of silence, it analyzed the message for threats and danger, and when it saw the faces of humans, still alive, still building, it sent an alert back to Union command. At a Union outpost light years away, a screen flashed red. An officer rubbed his eyes and stared at the words, his mouth dry, his voice thin, as he called for the commander. They should be dead, he said. They should be dust. The Union command gathered around the screen, faces pale, voices low, watching as the signal played again and again. Images of life, of power, of something unexpected. PX-79 has been compromised, a tall alien said, his skin pale and scaled, his eyes cold. We must act before this spreads. Back on PX-79, the camp held its breath, waiting for a response. None came for hours. Then a sound like thunder rolled across the sky. But it was not thunder, it was engines. Kale ran to the ridge, pulling up a scope. The clouds broke for a moment, and he saw the black shape of a Union ship sliding through the sky like a knife. It was not large, not yet, just a scout, just a warning. They know, he said. They saw the signal, and now they come. The humans moved fast, faster than ever. Drills sounded, hammers fell, orders flew like arrows. The towers were armed, the tunnels closed, the young were hidden, and the old stood ready. Dr. Lena climbed to the top of the watch post, holding her scanner, her eyes wide, as the ship moved closer. "We do not have weapons like theirs," she said, "but we can blind them, we can confuse them." Solon appeared at her side, holding a small cube, filled with glowing energy. "I can jam their systems. For a short time," he said, "just enough to make them fear." Kale gave the signal, and Solon pressed his hand to the cube. Light poured out like fire, and the air around the ship shimmered. The engines coughed, the lights blinked, the ship shook, and then rose higher, pulling away into the clouds. "They are watching us," Kale said, "not ready to strike, not yet." The people gathered at the edge of the camp, watching the sky. As the storm swallowed the ship again, no one spoke for a long time. That night around the fire, Kale stood before them, all his face hard, his voice steady. "They sent us here to disappear," he said. "They thought PX-79 would kill us, bury us, make us nothing. But they were wrong, and now they are afraid." He looked at the children, at the old man, at the wounded, at Solon and Lena, and the others. "You made this place more than a cage, you made it a home, and now we will defend it, not just for us, but for every voice they tried to silence." In the sky, the stars burned colder than ever, but on the ground fire danced in human eyes, and steel sang in their hands, and PX-79 no longer felt like death. It felt like the beginning of something bigger. Far away in the halls of Union Power, the signal continued to spread, leaked into back channels, into rogue networks, into rebel screens. Across the galaxy, people watched the humans building, laughing, rising from the dirt, and they began to whisper, if humans could live on PX-79, maybe the Union was not as strong as it claimed. And maybe death planets could be beaten. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to fight back. The camp had grown wider, stronger, louder. Machines hummed, fires burned high, and the walls were thick with metal, and stone towers now reached into the dust clouds, watching always, waiting always ready. The humans had changed, not just in body, but in mind. They were not survivors anymore. They were builders, they were thinkers, and they were preparing for war. Kale stood at the center of it all, armor on shoulders, broad eyes sharp. He was not smiling, he never smiled, but something in his voice had grown lighter, more alive. The sky may still be filled with storms, but the fire in his people had never burned brighter. Dr. Lena called him to the lab, her voice low, her tone quick. She had been studying the vault where Solon had been found for weeks, and now something new had opened, something strange, not metal, not stone, something that moved only when it was watched. Solon stood beside her, glowing softly, his skin smooth and gold. His voice was calm, but heavy. He had unlocked the ancient memory system of the structure, using energy only his people knew how to shape, and the system had begun to speak. Images danced in the air, shadows of old buildings, rivers of light, cities underground, filled with his people. The Seraphan, once proud, once wise, now lost, buried, broken, crushed by the same force that now ruled the Union. "They sent us here," Solon said, "to test us, to trap us, to erase us. We built to survive, we fought back, they came again, and they came harder, and now I am the last." Kale listened without a word, his face carved from stone. The Union had done this not just to humans, but to others before them. They had erased voices, worlds, histories, and called it peace. Dr. Lena pointed to a new recording, a star map, glowing red lines, crossing through the galaxy, showing other exile zones, other species, other silenced voices. It was not one mistake, it was a pattern. "We cannot fight them alone," she said, "but we may not have to." Solon tilted his head, thinking, feeling the ground. "I can reach them," he said. His kind had used deep signals, energy beneath light, energy that passed through stone and time. If others still lived, if others still remembered, he could call them. Kale looked around the camp, his people sharpening tools, loading weapons, fixing shields. They were ready to die for each other, but maybe now they did not have to die alone. He gave the order, and Solon began his work deep beneath the lab, where the vault breathed slow and cold. Solon built a signal tower, not steel or wire, but of light and memory and song. It pulsed through the ground like a heartbeat, and echoed far beyond PX-79, into space, into exile, into pain. For days there was no answer, only silence, only wind, only the hum of machines, and the crack of fire. Then late one night the sky changed. It began with a flicker, then a beam of light, then a crack of thunder that was not thunder, and above the clouds something fell. The camp rushed to arm, shields up, weapons raised, but when the object hit the ground it did not explode, it unfolded. Inside was a figure, not human, not Union, tall and thin, with skin like bark and eyes like glass. She stepped forward and raised her hands. I heard your call, she said, her voice like leaves. Her name was Sarah, and her people had lived on another prison world far away, where ice never melted, and the sun never rose. They had survived too, and now they were ready. Others came next in ships old and broken, in pods built from bone and steam. Each carried a story of loss and silence, and fire. Each had been called, each had answered. PX-79 was no longer just a camp, it was a beacon, a cry, a spark. Cale stood among the new arrivals, his eyes scanning every face, every hand, every scar. He saw soldiers and farmers, healers and hunters, beings of shape and shadow, of scale and stone, but all with the same look, the same wound. Solon moved through them like wind, speaking in thoughts, not words, sharing stories, through touch, through memory, through breath. Dr. Lena gathered them into groups, showed them what the humans had built, how they had turned poison into food, how they had shaped death into shelter, how they had made war into something more. The new allies shared their own gifts, metals that bent like cloth, fuels that burned cold, shields that sang, weapons that danced through air like birds. The camp became a city, not tall, not wide, but deep, full of tunnels and towers and laughter and learning, a place of pain, yes, but also of promise. Cale walked the streets at night, watching children of many races play with stones and sticks, listening to songs sung in languages older than stars, his heart still heavy, but no longer hollow. But peace never came easy, and above them, far away, Union eyes still watched. The message had spread. The Union knew PX-79 was not a grave, but a fire. And now they moved. One morning before the sun could rise, the sky lit up with flame. A Union battleship entered orbit, sleek and black and silent. It held no flag, no mercy, only orders. Cale saw it first through the tower scope. He called the alarm, sent runners. Through the city people moved fast, no panic, just action. The shields rose, the towers locked, the gates sealed. Sarah and the others gathered around him, ready, waiting, willing to stand together for something more than survival. Solon stood at the top of the tower, holding another cube, this one pulsing hard. He looked at Cale and nodded. This one is different, it does not jam, it speaks. Cale gave the signal, and Solon raised the cube. High, a beam of light shot into the sky, not to blind, not to block, but to send a message. We are alive. We are not afraid. Come and see what you try to bury. The Union ship hovered above, unmoving for hours. Then slowly it turned, and left, not in fear, not in peace, but in thought. They had seen something they did not expect. PX-79 had become something else, not a prison, not a grave, but a voice, and that voice had just begun to rise. The sky above PX-79 cracked with fire as the Union fleet returned. This time, they did not send scouts or watchers. They sent ships with teeth, heavy black war machines, shaped like daggers, moving in silence through the clouds. The message was clear. They were not here to warn, they were here to end. Cale stood on the highest wall of the camp, eyes locked on the growing shadow in the sky. His armor was old, dented, scratched by years of storms and battles, but he wore it like a second skin. His hand rested on the railing, while the wind pushed against his coat. Behind him, the camp was silent, not in fear, but in focus. He turned to Lena, who stood with Solon and the others beside the new defense tower, a tall structure built from old alien parts, wrapped in wires and powered by heat pulled from the ground. They had been building it for weeks, a quiet project, known only to a few, waiting for this moment. They are within range, Cale said, voice low, eyes calm, no panic in his words, just truth. Are we ready? Lena nodded once her fingers moved across the controls. Sparks flew from the panel as the circuits came alive. The tower began to hum, not with fear, but with power, the kind of power born from desperation and purpose. Solon stepped forward, holding a thin glass panel glowing blue. The energy readings show weakness in their lower shields. He said, we can strike first. If we hit the right point, they will fall back and think twice. Cale looked at the sky again, then at his people. He saw engineers, covered in oil, farmers, holding tools, like weapons, children hiding behind steel doors, eyes wide, but steady, and warriors from every race that had answered their call, standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to fight. Fire the tower, Cale said, and the ground shook as the first bolt of light tore into the sky. A scream of energy painted across the clouds, hitting the lead Union ship just under the wing. The impact rippled across its hull, and the engines coughed. For one short moment, the ship dropped. The camp erupted into motion. The defense lines came alive with traps and cannons. Shields sparked into place, and towers released waves of heat and static meant to blind and confuse the invaders. It was not a polished army. It was not a perfect wall. It was survival made into strategy. Union dropships began to fall like stones into the red dust, unloading troops. With cold metal steps, they moved fast, weapons high, faces hidden under steel helmets. They spoke no words, only marched forward like machines. Kale met them on the field, his blade in one hand, a shock spear in the other. Behind him were human fighters, with armor made from ship plates. Beside him were Seraphan warriors, moving like shadows, and other allies wielding strange tools and fire that danced like liquid. The first clash was brutal, no music, no speech, just motion and noise, metal against metal, flesh against stone. The dust filled the air, turning red with heat and smoke. Dr. Lena stayed in the tower, relaying movements, watching the skies, tracking the ships. She gave orders in short, sharp words, sending supplies where needed, calling back wounded, rerouting power to weakening shields. Every second counted, every breath mattered. Solon worked deeper underground in a chamber filled with old machines, his hands glowing as he connected wires to cores and memory shards. He was building something more, something old, something his people had once used to blind fleets and silent storms. He worked with focus, eyes burning with memory and loss. Above them the battle raged on. Humans fell and rose again, dragging their wounded away, pulling their fighters forward. Kale moved like a storm through the field, striking with fury and purpose, his eyes locked on the Union commander, a tall figure in black armor, standing behind the first wave, silent, cold, deadly. Kale broke through the line with a roar. His blade struck the commander's weapon, sparks flew, and the two locked eyes. The commander tried to speak, but Kale hit again and again until the helmet cracked and the face behind it showed not fear, but confusion. "You were supposed to be dead," the commander said, voice thin, dry, broken. "This was a grave, not a city." Kale grabbed the front of the armor and pulled the commander close. His voice was fire. "Then you should have buried us deeper." He hit once more, and the commander fell unconscious, dragged away by human fighters, taken not to be killed, but to be questioned. The field began to shift. The Union troops were losing ground, confused by the strange weapons, blinded by traps, slowed by terrain they thought was dead, but had been shaped into a maze by people who refused to die. Dr. Lena's voice came over the signal tower. "They are pulling back," she said. "Engines are hot. They are preparing to run." Solon appeared in the tower doorway, covered in dust, his work done. Behind him the old machine began to hum, with a deep sound like the breath of the planet itself. It sent a wave into the sky, not a weapon, but a signal, a message, not of war, but of truth. The message spread across the stars the same way the first did, but now with more. It carried images of the battle, voices of the survivors, the captured commander. His words recorded, his orders exposed, proof that the Union had returned, not to check, not to protect, but to erase. Systems on the edge of Union space picked up the signal. First pirates, smugglers, hidden networks. They shared it like fire in dry grass, and soon it reached neutral worlds, small governments, and forgotten colonies. And even some voices within the Union itself began to ask questions. Why did they attack? What did they fear? Who had they left behind before? Back on PX-79 the smoke began to clear, the fires slowed, the wounded were gathered, the dead were named not in silence, but in voice loud and strong, carved into stone beside the towers. Their names would never be lost. Kale stood before the people again, his face stained with dust and blood, his voice low but proud. "Today we stood, today we proved that we are not shadows, not ghosts, not mistakes. We are something more." Around him stood allies with scars and stories, children with wide eyes now filled with light, not fear, and people who had come to a death world and made it into a place of truth. The first strike had ended, not with silence, not with surrender, but with a message, and the stars were listening. PX-79 stood quiet under a red sky, not silent, but still like the breath before the storm. The ground still held the scars of the last battle. Smoke trails marked the hills, broken weapons rested in piles beside the gates, and names of the fallen now lined the main wall, carved deep into black stone, each name a promise that no one would be forgotten. Kale walked slowly through the central square, his boots heavy, his eyes steady. The people watched him not as a leader above them, but as one of them, the same blood, the same dirt, the same fire. They had all stood side by side, and they had all survived. Dr. Lena stood waiting near the tower, her hands covered in grease, her eyes sharp. She had not slept in 2 days. Her voice was tired, but clear. The signal reached thousands. She said, We are getting answers. Systems across the stars are asking what really happened here. Kale looked up at the sky, where stars flickered behind the clouds, where ships once hovered in threat, and now held their distance. They are watching, he said, but they do not understand, yet they do not see the truth. That changes now, Lena said, and stepped aside, revealing the platform behind her. It was simple, just a raised square made of stone and steel, nothing grand, nothing soft, but it carried power in its shape, power in its purpose. It was the place where truth would speak and lies would end. In the center of the platform sat the captured Union commander, his armor cracked, his face bruised, his hands bound with wire. He stared out at the crowd with eyes that once held pride and now held only confusion. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "No one in particular. Why waste time on words when you could be hiding or running or praying?" Kale stepped onto the platform, his voice carried through the city. "This is not just for us," he said. "This is for every voice the Union tried to erase, every planet left in dust, every species buried in silence. This is not revenge, this is proof." Around the platform stood cameras and projectors built from scrap and alien tech. They were linked to the old machine. Solon had awakened a machine that carried messages through the stars faster than light. Not just data, but memory. Not just images, but truth. Solon stood near the base of the platform, glowing softly, his presence quiet but heavy, his eyes locked on the commander, his mind full of the weight of history. The trial began not with anger, but with questions. Dr. Lena asked the first. Why were humans sent to PX-79? Why not prison? Why not trial? Why this? The commander hesitated, then spoke. "Orders," he said. "Orders from the high circle. Your people were deemed unstable, too violent, too wild, too dangerous." Kale stepped forward. "What proof did they have?" he asked. "What crime did we commit? What law did we break?" The commander said nothing. His silence was louder than lies. Solon raised his hand, and a wave of memory flowed into the air. Images of other races, other camps, other exiles, all marked the same way: dangerous, uncontrollable, disposable. The crowd grew tense. Not just humans, but others who had also been left behind, who had also lost their homes, their names, their histories. Syrah, the warrior from the ice world, stepped forward, her voice sharp and cold. "You called us unstable," she said, "but we lived, we built, we healed. You called us wild, but we made peace where you made war." Another voice joined, and a healer from the desert moon, his face lined with age, his eyes soft. "You feared what you could not shape, what you could not own." The commander shook his head. "This is not the way," he said. "Trials are for the innocent, not the guilty." Kale raised a hand, and the crowd quieted. "Then tell us," he said, "tell us why you burned our world, why you sent our children to die, why you covered it in silence." The commander looked around, saw the faces, the eyes, the fire, and something broke inside him. Not fear, not regret, just the weight of too many years of following orders without asking why. "We did what we were told," he said. "We thought it was right. We thought the Union was protecting the galaxy from chaos." Dr. Lena stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Then why erase the records? Why hide the camps? Why lie?" Again silence. The machine recorded everything, every word, every pause, every breath. It sent the trial across the star systems, watched in silent stations, played the signal in full homes that once feared the Union, listened and learned. Whispers turned to voices, voices turned to questions, questions turned to protests, and for the first time in many years the Union felt uncertain. Back on PX-79, the trial came to its close. Kale looked over the people, the allies, the wounded, the strong. He looked at the platform and the broken man upon it. "We do not ask for revenge," he said. "We ask for truth. We ask for light in the places you tried to keep dark." Solon raised his hand again, and the machine sent one last message, not of war, not of fire, not of blood, but of memory. It showed what the humans had done since exile. The buildings, the farms, the schools, the fires, kept warm through endless nights, the friendships formed across race and world in pain. The last image was of the children playing under a shielded sky, laughing free and whole in a place meant to break them. Kale stepped down from the platform, and the people followed, not with weapons, not with cheers, but with quiet purpose, the kind that shapes the future one stone at a time. The commander remained seated alone, the machine behind him still glowing, still watching. Dr. Lena walked beside Kale as they crossed the main square. "What now?" she asked. "Now we wait," Kale said. "Wait for the stars to answer, wait for the silence to break, wait for others to rise." "And they will," Lena said, and she believed it. PX-79 was no longer just a name, it was a signal, it was a symbol, it was a place where the buried rose and the forgotten spoke, and now the galaxy listened. The wind on PX-79 carried no fire. That morning only calm, only quiet, only the soft sound of banners moving in the breeze, banners made from cloth and wire painted with the names of the fallen and the symbols of every tribe and every voice that had once been cast aside by the Union. Kale stood on the high ridge looking over the city below, no longer a camp, no longer a shelter, now a home, towers shaped from stone and steel, gardens filled with color machines, humming with quiet strength, built by hands that refused to give up, built by people who chose to live. Beside him stood Dr. Lena, her hands folded, her face calm, though her eyes flicked to the sky again and again. Today was the day, she said softly, they promised today. Kale did not answer, he only watched. He remembered every step, every cry, every loss, and every fire that had brought them to this moment, and deep inside, he wondered if the stars would really listen. Then the sky opened with light, not with fire, not with war, but with shapes too smooth and too silent to be called threats, massive ships with sails of silver and hulls that glowed like suns, and at their heart the symbol of the free systems council, a symbol long thought lost, long thought broken. Across the valley people paused, tools stopped, hands froze, breath held, all eyes turned upward as the first real fleet of peace arrived over PX-79. The ships did not descend in threat, they hovered in grace, and one ship, smaller and rounder and glowing soft, came down slow, like a falling star, to the landing field, made ready for this moment. Kale turned and began to walk, Lena beside him, Solon behind, glowing steady. More humans followed, then the allied races, then the young, then the old, a river of life flowing toward the meeting place. The ship opened not with noise, but with light, and from it stepped a figure in blue robes with silver thread and bright eyes, not young, not old, with hair like smoke and a voice like wind. I am Eli of the Free Council. I come not as judge, not as ruler, I come to listen. Kale stepped forward. I am Kale of Earth, once a soldier, now a voice of the broken. Welcome to PX-79. Eli looked around and nodded. I see no ruin here, only hope, only courage, only truth. Behind Eli came others, scholars, speakers, builders, not with weapons, but with tools, not with orders, but with questions. They walked the city, spoke with the people, touched the walls, read the names, and wept for strangers they had never met. For 3 days they stayed, for 3 days. They listened, no speeches, no commands, no flags, only memory and truth. On the 4th morning Eli called for gathering, and the city answered. Thousands stood in the great square, under the banners, under the sky, under the eyes of every system, now watching through the machine Solon had kept alive. Eli stood before them and spoke. I have seen with my eyes what you have built, I have heard with my ears what you have suffered. I have walked among you, and I have felt the fire you carry, and I say this now, not as ruler, not as judge, but as witness. What was done to you was not justice, what was done to you was not peace, what was done to you must never be done again, to any world, to any voice, to any people. The crowd did not cheer, the crowd did not cry, they stood in silence, heavy and whole, and for the first time in many years that silence was not made of pain, but of healing. Eli turned to Kale, to Lena, to Solon, and then to the people, and said, the Union will answer for its crimes, the Council will see to that, but here today I ask you this, will you stand with us, not just in anger, not just in grief, but in unity? Will you help us rebuild not just stars, but trust? Kale stepped forward, his voice steady. We are not soldiers. We are not tools. We are not ghosts. We are people, and we choose to stand not for revenge, not for hate, but for life. The crowd raised their hands in answer, not fists, not weapons, only hands open, strong, and full of promise. That day marked the beginning of what the stars would one day call the turning, when broken worlds rose together, when forgotten voices joined, when the light of one planet pierced the silence of many. PX-79 became more than a world, it became a council seat, a sanctuary, a place where no one would be cast aside again, where truth would be kept safe and loud. The Union did not fall in fire, but in questions, in protests, in truth, as more systems turned away, as more voices rose, as those who had ruled in silence were forced into light. Kale never returned to war, he stayed on PX-79, walking its paths, teaching its young, watching its gardens grow. Dr. Lena led the science guilds, sharing what they had built, what they had learned, turning scrap into wonders, and dreams into machines. Solon became the guardian of the machine, not just its keeper, but its voice ensuring that no memory was ever lost again. And across the stars, stories spread, stories of the planet, once called a death sentence, stories of people who refused to die, stories of fire that gave light instead of ash. The children of PX-79 grew strong. They learned to plan, to speak, to build, to ask, and to remember. They were born from dust, but not made of it. Each year, they held the fire day, not for war, not for sorrow, but for unity. Torches lit not to burn, but to shine. Names read aloud, stories told, faces remembered, songs sung not in grief, but in strength. Ships came now not to exile, but to visit, to learn, to honor. Every traveler found welcome, every voice found place. And in the sky above a new station stood its name, simple and bold, the voice. From the voice, messages spread across the galaxy, stories, warnings, hopes, and truths, every signal marked by the same seal, the same flame, the mark of PX-79. In time, the stars changed, not because of law, not because of power, but because of people, because of hands that worked and hearts that held on and minds that refused to forget. And so the story of humanity on PX-79 did not end with silence, did not end with death, it ended with choice. And with that choice began something new. Not a tale of loss, but a spark of light that no storm could break.